Kelly Tannehill. I do have an MSW. Sorry, got it. I have an MSW. I work for the state of Oklahoma as a tribal coordinator. I've had that position for 6 years. And let's see, I've been a professional social worker. I got my BSW in '98, and I've been in social work ever since then, pretty much. So I always consider myself a jack of all trades and a master of none. Usually I will stay on a job a couple of years and then I get bored with it, or I feel like I've learned it all. I will tell you what, I have never, ever thought that about the position that I hold now, due to the challenges every day and things constantly change. So it keeps me involved and it keeps me engaged. And that's something that I really like. I'm a person that likes to be challenged. So we're going to go over a lot of information today. If you have a question, and we'll have time for that, but you could also pop it in the chat and they will be monitoring that if it's to that subject and you want to ask. So please do. And we're going to get started. So one of the first things about ICWA is, why do we have ICWA? Why do we even have it? So the history that I'm going to go over, it pertains to Oklahoma, because that's what I know. I haven't worked in another state. I haven't worked in other places like that. I've only worked in Oklahoma, and I'm from Oklahoma, and I identify as being Native American. So we're going to talk about that and go from there. And it doesn't cover everything. So to even do historical trauma, that's a whole day training just on that. So this is going to be brief, and it's going to kind of give you some reasons as to why we have ICWA today. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. Why do we have ICWA? I've introduced myself, and hopefully you guys are signing in on the chat and posting anything that you would really like to learn today or was hoping to gain more knowledge of. And right now, I want to take a couple minutes. Let's take 2 or 3 minutes, maybe not even that long. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, if you want to type it on your computer, if you just want to put it in your phone, but I want an elevator answer. That's a very short answer. So if you're riding in an elevator and you're coming to this training today and someone goes, oh, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to ICWA training. What is ICWA? Again, you're in an elevator. So it needs to be a 1 or 2 sentence answer. What is ICWA? So if you'll just take a couple minutes to write that down, and then just, it's for you, just set it to the side, and we're going to do something with that later. Okay, 1 more minute, and then I'm going to go on to the next slide. Again, this is just for you, so don't worry about having to share it. Okay, we're going to go on. What led up to ICWA? This is a national as well as an Oklahoma timeline. I kind of combined it because I could never find a timeline that showed specifically to Oklahoma and the changes that we had here. And so this really just kind of gives you an idea of the history of Native Americans. And it looks at everything that was done. The Removal Act. Tribes were forced from their land. If you're Cherokee, Cherokees called that when they were forced from North Carolina to Oklahoma, they call that the Trail of Tears. That is very specific to Cherokees. Other tribes do not, that were forced here, do not refer to it as a Trail of Tears. It wasn't for them. They call it forced removal, but that's what the Cherokees call it. So we had Indian Wars, the Majors Crime Act, the Dawes Allotment Act, the Oklahoma Enabling Act. which dissolve the agreement with tribes concerning reservations, which, as we know now, because of McGirt, which was last year in 2020, which is down at the bottom, was overruled, was changed through our Supreme Court. But this gives you an idea of everything that has been done over the years to tribes here in America. And then finally, in 1978, we have the Indian Child Welfare Act. And in Oklahoma, we have the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act. We're one of the few states. I think at one point in time, there was 7. And then a few months ago, New Mexico passed a state law, I believe. So there's 8 states within the US that have a state law as well as the federal law. So there were tribes here in Oklahoma, known as Indian Territory back in the day, but a lot of tribes were forced here. And this shows you how the tribes were forced. So think about it. If you're being forced and there are thousands of people on the same trail that you're walking, you're going to be limited on your resources. What you chose to carry and take with you is going to be lightened as you continue to walk. People died along when they were being forced here. They didn't have supplies, they starved, they were sick. And so they were forced here in Oklahoma, and it was known as Indian Territory back then. And this is sort of what it looks like today. This is one of the maps that I sent to you. This shows the DHS Child Welfare Service regions and counties with tribal jurisdictions. Here in the state of Oklahoma, we now have 5 reservations due to McGirt. And so this is going to give you an idea of that. I also emailed, or they should have emailed beforehand, an interactive map that looks at those 5 reservations where you can click on it and it'll take you to that tribe's reservation. I created both these maps. So this gives you an idea. In the state of Oklahoma, we actually have 38 tribes that are federally recognized. There's actually 39. There's one tribe that was at one point in time that was federally recognized and chose to not be any longer. They did not want the federal government involved with their tribe, and that is the Uchi tribe. So to me, some of the key factors that led up to ICWA was the Indian Civilization Act and Peace Policy in the late 1800s, which caused the boarding schools placement. The act and policy persuaded various Christian churches to adopt the Indian boarding school policy for the sole purpose of cultural genocide. Indian Appropriation Act, that stated the U.S. did not see tribal governments as sovereign nations and treat Indians as the wards of the state. And then hundreds and thousands of Native American children were taken from their families and homes to be placed in boarding schools. And then in the 60s and 50s, we had our federal government developed an Indian adoption project. And then 1975, there was an adoption of John Doe. It was a case that a lot of people are not real familiar with. So all these things kept happening. Children were being taken away from families and being forced into boarding schools. If they were able to escape and run away when they went back because families were being forced to move, they were disconnected from their family. They couldn't find them. And so think of that. I know a lot of people don't realize the state that had the most boarding schools within the U.S. is right here in Oklahoma. And today I live in Coweta, Oklahoma. Coweta is a Creek word, what I have been told over the years. And we had a boarding school right here in Coweta, and it burnt down. It was the mission boarding school. And then they rebuilt it, and they didn't even name it a boarding school. They basically was a workhouse for children, and it also burnt down. We had 2 boarding schools right around here, and a lot of people do not realize how many boarding schools were in the state of Oklahoma at one point in time. We do have boarding schools now, of course. They're ran much different than they were then. So the truth is, have you ever heard the term, kill the Indian, save the man? Well, that was the motto of Richard Henry Pratt, who was the most prominent Indian educator of the late 1800s. Pratt believed it was essential to get Indian children away from their families and nations in order to prevent parents from raising their children in their own cultures. So by 1900, there were 20,000 children in boarding schools, and the number tripled by 1925. Children were stripped of any culture, language, clothing, hair, belongings, and thought to be acting like an Indian. They had to suffer starvation, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, not only by those running the boarding school, but from other children placed. Because what we know now is that when a child continuously is hurt, a hurt child does what to other children? Hurts, right? And so it was prevalent within boarding schools. So this is one of the very first boarding schools, or one of the most famous, not the first, but one of the most famous, which is the Carlisle Indian boarding school. And what are some of the things that you notice about this picture? And please speak up, just kind of shout out someone. What do you notice in this picture?
Short hair.
Okay, short hair, yes. What else?
Uniformity.
Uniformity, absolutely. What else?
Sad faces.
Sad faces, sure.
No one smiling.
Nobody.
Scared and frightened faces.
Scared and frightened. What else do you see?
Kelly, we have some.
Very young.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Dijon?
Okay, we have some comments in the chat. I was just going to read. No smiles, short hair, no one looks happy. There's a lot of children, and then it looks like a plantation.
It does.
Boys and girls separated.
Yes, but look at the ratio of boys and girls.
A lot more boys.
A lot more boys. And then also look at, if you guys will notice, so the children are in the gray and the adults that are running this boarding school are in the black. And many times they would recruit people that had been through the boarding school to stay and work there. So if, look at the adults that are there versus the children. You know, what type of supervision do you think was happening at that time with those few of adults? Not a lot, right? So that's something to think about. Here's another picture. This is a very famous picture. If you look at it, it's the same group of children, family, before and after. And what do you see of that? This is before going into the boarding school, and this is while they're in the boarding school. What do you notice in these pictures, the differences?
Their hair was cut.
Hair was cut, yep. What else? Clothes. The clothes are different.
Clothing and shoes.
Clothing and shoes. What about their positioning? See how they're sitting in that picture? Even that was changed. They couldn't even stand like they wanted to stand. They were positioned all to set straight, right? They were totally stripped of who they are. And a lot of times when I do this training, I try to get people to think of, what if today someone came and took your child over to Switzerland and said, okay, you can only speak this language. You have to eat what we eat. You have to wear the clothes we wear. You know, all that, what you had with your family is gone. And it just totally strips them of their identity. So there was a real struggle. And a lot of people always say, well, boarding schools don't really matter. That was then, this is now. It doesn't affect us now. Well, I'm going to tell you, it does. It still does. And it does in my own family. And I'm going to share a story with you. So I'm Native through my biological father. And I did get to see my biological paternal grandmother up until she died when I was 4. My father was the youngest out of 10 kids. So I have a lot of older first cousins. And one of the things I can remember about my Indian grandma is that she would always scare me, and then she would make me be real still and quiet. So I kind of remembered that. Then later in life, I kind of reconnected with some of my first cousins, and I would watch them do that with their kids. They would, as toddlers, they would frighten them, and then they would make them be still and be very quiet. So later, I have a child. I have a son. He is now 23 years old. I did the same thing to my son. I would scare him, and then I'd make him be still and be quiet. It wasn't until I got this job and I started doing research and started developing my PowerPoints and started really looking at my own history, did I make that connection. Where, why did I do that? Well, guess what? My great-great-grandmother was raised in a boarding school. And so what they did is they literally came and just stole children. They took children. So if you're in a community, you would know when these people were coming to take your kids, because people would run ahead. They're coming to get your kids, and you would hide your children. So that has been passed down in my family. We continue to do that. I mean, I've reached out to my first cousins explaining why we do this and we should stop. But it does stop now. It stops with my son. He will not do that to his children, because I don't have to worry anymore that someone's going to come take my grandkid one day or whatever. Not that I have any yet, but that is a huge thing within my family of why we did that. Is that good parenting, scaring the crap out of your kid and then making him be still and quiet? No, it's not. But it was something that my family has been taught to do to protect their children and keep them safe. They wanted to hide them. So it does matter. I have another friend. Her father was raised, she is Aleut. She's from Alaska. She lives here in Oklahoma. And her father was sent from Alaska to here to Oklahoma to one of the boarding schools and was raised in a boarding school. So that affected his parenting, which affected her parenting, which affects her children, which are my age of children. So those are things to think about. It's still prevalent today. Boarding schools before they were starved. There was sexual abuse. There are families where sexual abuse has been happening, and you can trace it back from a boarding school. Tribal sovereignty. Finally, the tribes started getting tired of it, you know, and so they fought for the right for our government to recognize them. You know, tribes had their own laws. And even today, they have their own laws, their own courts, their own judicial system, their own police. They've had this for years. They had it before we even came to America. A lot of our own politics, the way we've developed here in America, is based on tribes and how they did things. And people don't realize that. So tribes finally got sovereignty, where our government recognized that they are a sovereign nation. And the best way to keep that in your mind is when you're dealing with a federally recognized tribe. And what that means is our federal government recognizes this certain tribe as being a sovereign nation. That tribes are continuing to still fight for that right. When I started this job, there was like 560 something. And I think now there's 574. I'll have to look that up. I'm horrible with numbers, but it's increased, and tribes continue to get that federal recognition. There are a lot of tribes out there that I have dealt with, or within my job, workers reach out to me and say, hey, I can't find this tribe. And I always say, if it's not on the BIA list, then it's not a federally recognized tribe. So the BIA keeps the most up-to-date list of all the federally recognized tribes here within the US and how to contact them as it pertains to ICWA. So we come along, tribes finally got sovereignty, our federal government started recognizing that, and they started fighting for their right because their children were still being taken from them. And they had no say in what was happening to them or where they were going or what happened. They didn't know. So some of the things is, what is an Indian child? An Indian child is an unmarried person under the age of 18 years old and is a member of an Indian tribe or eligible for membership of an Indian tribe and the biological child of a member of an Indian tribe. And an Indian child's tribe means an Indian tribe in which an Indian child is a member or eligible for membership. The Indian tribe which the Indian child who is a member or is eligible for membership in more than one tribe has a more significant contacts as designated. Basically, someone can be eligible for membership into multiple tribes. It's the parent that usually decides that, or will decide which tribe to enroll their child with, whichever one they identify more with. Some tribes will allow you to be what we call duly enrolled. That means you could be enrolled in both tribes at the same time. But a lot of tribes here in Oklahoma do not allow that to be duly enrolled. You could say either or type situation. So 1978 finally happens and the tribes continue to advocate. So historically, an alarming high percentage of Indian families in comparison to the general population have been broken up by the often unwarranted removal of their children by non-tribal public and private agencies. A disturbingly high percentage of such children have been placed in non-Indian foster care and adoptive homes and institutions. Indian children have a unique, here's the thing, political status as a member of a sovereign tribal government. Congress, through the Constitution, states, treaties, and the general course of dealing with Indian tribes, is charged with the responsibility for the protection and preservation of Indian tribes and their resources, including Indian children. The special political status of Indian tribes, as well as the history of biased treatment of Indian children and families under public and non-Indian private child welfare systems, is the basis for the enactment of ICWA. So this is a federal act for all the states. And that's one of the things that people don't understand. They feel like ICWA is a race law. ICWA is not a race law. It is a political law between two sovereign nations, the United States and our tribal governments. A lot of times in my job, I'll get a call with the tribe won't cooperate, the tribe isn't doing this. And my reply is, guess what? They don't have to. They're a sovereign nation. It's like dealing with Canada. If we took a Canadian kid into custody, what are we going to do? We're going to call Canada. We got one of your kids is a citizen of your country. So always think of it in that way. And remember, a tribe is a sovereign nation and they have the right to do as they choose. So there's one thing to think about that. ICWA does not apply to private civil matters, such as divorces. A lot of tribes will not get involved in private adoptions. However, that is not every tribe. I do know of tribes that will become involved in a private adoption due to ICWA. So they can exercise that right and try to intercede. So that's just something to keep in mind. A lot of times people will say that ICWA ignores the best interest of Indian children, and that is absolutely not correct. That's false. ICWA was designed to promote the best interests and unique needs of Indian children and families. So the purpose of ICWA, what is the purpose of it? It is to protect the best interests, like I just said, of Indian children, to promote stability and security of Indian tribes and families by the establishment of minimum federal standards for the removal of Indian children and placement of such children in homes which will reflect the unique values of the Indian culture. Federal ICWA affirms the rights of tribes to be notified of potential involvement of OKDHS. Once again, I'm getting specific to Oklahoma. They can assume jurisdiction or otherwise be involved in the case. It sets minimum standards for the removal of Indian children, and it sets requirements for placement into culturally appropriate homes. OWICWA, because here in the state of Oklahoma, I call it a double whammy state. Not only do we have a federal act, but we have a state act. So OWICWA pretty much is the legal authority and applicability, of the federal and state Indian Child Welfare Acts and child custody proceedings. Okay, we're going to go on. I mean, you can have these slides. I can email it out if you like. But this kind of breaks down and it affirms what ICWA is about. Ooh, who knew it did that? All of a sudden. Here we go. ICWA versus OICWA. Okay, so the Indian Child Welfare Act, enacted in November 8th, 1978, is a federal law that governs jurisdiction over the removal of Native American children from their families in custody, foster care, adoption cases. It gives tribal governments exclusive jurisdiction over children who reside on or are domiciled on a reservation. It also gives concurrent but presumptive jurisdiction over foster care placements proceedings for Native children who do not live on a reservation. And then OICWA, the purpose of the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act is a clarification of state policies and procedures regarding the implementation by state of Oklahoma on the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act. It shall be the policy of the state to recognize that Indian tribes and nations have valid governmental interest in Indian children, regardless of whether said children are in the physical or legal custody of the Indian parent or Indian custodian at the time proceedings are initiated. It shall be the policy of the state to cooperate fully with the Indian tribes in Oklahoma in order to ensure that the intent and provisions of the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act are enforced. So here in the state with DHS Child Welfare, their policy is based on the federal law as well as the state law and the Bureau of Indian Affairs regs. They have regulations that they recommend, and our policy is based on that as well. They changed, the BIA regs changed in 2016. I was one of the fortunate people here in the state of Oklahoma to go here at one of they had some open forums for people to come and talk. So I was able to witness that in Tulsa. It was pretty interesting and exciting to be a part of history. So in all of this, we have historical trauma. We have tribes that were forced, children being taken away, land that was taken. You know, when they came here to the state of Oklahoma, they were given allotments. Let me go back here, sorry, before we do this, back. They were given allotments of land. So a family, when they would come, they would get a lot of land. My ex-husband's family is one of those families, and their family still has that land. That allotted land is passed down to generation. So my son will not inherit that until his father passes, and then he will inherit that land. So you'll hear allotted land. You'll hear the term trust land. You'll hear now in Oklahoma, reservation. So there's a lot of terms for that, but it's tribes that can tell you that they're the experts on where their reservation lines are, or if a home or a facility is on trust land, native land, or reservation. The tribe tells you that. And the best people to ask, your ICWA department with the tribe, your realty department with the tribe. And people don't realize they do have realty departments. You are able, if you own a lot of land, you can sell that land. And once you do, it's no longer considered tribal land. That person would have to start paying taxes on it. That's one of the benefits of having a lot of land or trust land. You do not have to pay state taxes or taxes on it. Let's see. So everyone knows what ACEs is, I'm assuming. I hope you do. And so 3 years ago now, I believe it was 3, maybe 4. Anyway, they changed it. So on the left, you'll see that you're born, then adverse childhood experiences, social, emotional, cognitive impairment, so on and so forth. You can read that. So that's where they were for a long time. And then a few years ago, they changed and they started realizing that race, social condition, and local context, as well as generational embodiment and historical trauma. So if you're Native, you've already scored on this ACEs scale. Before you were even born, you've already scored on this. So it's really, it gets passed down, that trauma gets passed down in our DNA, and it goes generation to generation. And that's really something to think about. And that we're getting acknowledgement of that finally I believe is just a better way of coping and learning to help people. And think on this. Historical trauma is entirely different than consciously holding onto the past when it resides in your ancestral memory and DNA. It results in numerous defense mechanisms, developmental malfunctions, and behavioral issues. This is scientific and it's supported. You're more than welcome to look that up. I have her who said that, so. And generations are affected. Multiple generations of family can transmit the damage of trauma throughout the years. This isn't only just for Native Americans. Others have this as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of people here that have worked with people that have had this and seen it. Social workers must be aware and detect the subtle, not so subtle effects of family and community and people. Historical trauma is relevant to a genocide of people where some major event is aimed at a particular group because of their status as an oppressed group. One of the things people don't realize is the biggest genocide is of Native Americans, of how many were killed during the Indian Wars and throughout the years. And people don't really consider that a genocide, but it is. Intergenerational trauma, generations, they may struggle with emotions. Trauma can limit their parenting, child relationship, unresolved psychiatric problems can lead, borderline behaviors. Younger generations may develop a content attitude with how things are. So I think a lot of you have experience with intergenerational issues and problems and have seen it. The need for ICWA. So in 1978, 25 to 35% of all American Indian and Alaska Native children were moved from their homes by state child welfare and private adoption agencies. 85% of those children removed were placed outside of their homes, families, and communities. Even when fit, willing relatives were available. Why ICWA is still needed today is children are 4 times more likely to be removed by a state child welfare system than non-Native children, even when their families have similar presenting problems. 13 states have significant overrepresentation of Native American, Alaska Native children in their foster care systems. Children in state foster care at a rate of 14 times higher than their rate in general population. 50% of adopted Alaska Native American Indian children are adopted outside their families and communities. In Oklahoma, we have over 30% of all the children in custody are Native American. There's so many, and I just recently got some more information. So the 2020 census said here in the state of Oklahoma, there's only 9% of our total population is Native American. And then I've read others where it says it's still at 12 to 15% in the state of Oklahoma is Native American. Regardless, if we have over 30%, and it's, to be honest, it's somewhere roughly around 35, 36% of all the kids in the state's care is Native American. And those children, over 60% of all those children are placed in a non-ICWA home. So it is the state's responsibility to find a culturally appropriate home for that child, because it is the state that took that child into custody. It is not the tribe's job to find a home for that child because they did not remove that kid. And that's something that people don't really realize. Well, why isn't the tribe going out and finding me a home? Because it's not their responsibility. Tribes do recruiting. They do want their children in a Native home. And so the tribes that are able and can afford to hire recruiters in their ICWA departments to find foster homes, they do that. But the majority of tribes right here in the state of Oklahoma, their ICWA departments is usually 1 or 2 people. We have a lot of small tribes. It's the bigger tribes that have additional funding that are able to hire additional staff to do recruiting. But I only know of 5 tribes out of the 38 that have a full-time recruiter. So it is the state's job to find that type of individual or culturally appropriate foster home. I will tell you the state is now looking at these numbers, trying to figure out if they're accurate or not, if we are getting this information the appropriate way. So that is being looked at. I do want you to be aware of that. Another thing people don't realize, tribes don't have to follow ICWA. ICWA is for state agencies and private agencies. It is not for tribes. So tribes do not have to follow ICWA, and people don't realize that. The symptoms and long-term effects of historical trauma include, but are not limited to, unresolved emotional trauma we talked about, depression, high mortality rates, high levels of drug abuse and alcohol abuse, child abuse, domestic violence. So Native American Indians, the wounding goes back for over 500 years, and it's persistent and affecting the generations today. So American communities, the situations become dire, and the life expectancy at birth for Native American population is 2.4 years less than the US population combined. And some communities have a much worse odds, such as Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The life expectancy there is 46 for males and 49 for females. Cultural identity. You know, this is something that's so important and we forget about, is that each person has experienced their cultural connection in a unique way. An individual's own personal and family will determine their cultural identity and practices, which may change throughout their lifespan as they're exposed to different experiences. So what this means is a lot of times, excuse me a second, people don't realize, they'll say, oh, well, they're traditional. There's a lot of variations of being traditional. Someone that is Native American that is traditional is someone that participates with their tribe. They're very active. Usually they'll speak their language or learn to try to write it. They may participate in stomp ground ceremonies. They may go to a spiritual advisor, medicine man. So you can, and people will consider that person traditional. Well, you can have someone that goes to a medicine man that goes to church every Sunday and consider themselves a Christian. And so there's very different variations with people with this. And you don't realize that. You guys were emailed, and if you weren't, we can put it in the chat in a few minutes if you'd like. But this right here, this culture card, a guide to build culture awareness. If you've never worked with Native American populations, this is a really good starting point to give you some basic information in working with communities, different cultural differences. It talks about the distrust of the history. You know, even the BIA opened up boarding schools, took land from tribal people. So there's still a distrust with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The tribes distrust working with the state, DHS, state agencies. And so this really kind of goes into a lot of that detail, gives you some etiquette do's and don'ts about working with Native people, things to look at, what should you know about tribal sovereignty, cultural customs. I mean, this thing is awesome. So make sure you check it out. You can also order these if you have staff that you want to train or you feel like they would benefit from this. There's a number on back and they're free. So you can just order them. It's a great tool. I give those out to workers all the time and usually any training that I do. So the variation of cultural identity of people can be viewed that ranges between one who views themselves as traditional, like I just talked about, and their lives are traditional culture daily, to one who views himself as Indian or Native, but has little knowledge or interest in their own traditions or cultural practices. You know, I've heard a lot of times, sometimes when a Native child is placed with a non-Native family, of course, they bond, that foster parent wants to adopt that child. I will hear comments or things being said, well, this family doesn't even act Indian. this family doesn't even know anything about their culture. We're the ones doing this with this child. We're the one that's teaching them about their child because their parents don't care. They don't have any interest in it. And that's not true. And I'll tell you why, just like I talked about earlier, about my own experience being an educated person, being a social worker, and not making that connection of why I did something in my parenting that was based on my own historical trauma. So it could be people are influenced by their culture, and it can be in such a subtle way that a non-native person doesn't recognize it. It could be the way you line up to eat at a family gathering, who goes first and who doesn't, who says the prayer. Just little bitty subtle things that people don't realize that are so important to their cultural identity. This over the last week, a child, unfortunately, right here in a county, this is not a DHS custody or a tribal custody child, I want to make that clear, but this child was held down. A preteen boy was held down, and he had a long braid and his hair was cut off because he was Indian. And that was right here in Clinton, Oklahoma, not here because I'm in Quita, but in Clinton, Oklahoma, where that happened. And so there's still a lot of discrimination with Native Americans. My ex-husband is a full-blood Cherokee. He does not speak his language. He knows a few words. I know a few words of Cherokee. I'm Cherokee. But in his family, they did not, his parents' first language was Cherokee, and they spoke in broken English. They could not read or write Cherokee. They could barely read or write English, but they spoke in broken English. And so the grandmother, they're a matriarchal, Cherokees are a society, which means a woman sort of sets the rules and is the boss of the family. His grandmother did not want him to learn to speak his own language. She did not want him to speak in any type of broken English. So she was afraid of that. And so none of his siblings, all 7 of them, can't speak Cherokee. Their children can't speak Cherokee, just a few words here and there. So it all goes into what that family has experienced and how it's passed down in that community. While being married with my ex-husband, we would definitely experience a lot of racism, little comments being made, calling him chief. That is not appreciated. People don't want to hear that, and he would make it very clear, I'm not a chief. But you don't realize the discrimination that goes on until you are in that person's shoes or walking beside them. I obviously do not look identifiable as being Native American, but my ex-husband and my son definitely do. The only time it worked in our favor, I will tell you, is when we went to Hawaii when my son was 9. We got there and we got a suite. They bumped us up to a suite wherever we went. We'd be pulled out of the line to eat. We'd get a table, we'd get appetizers, free drinks. Finally, the 3rd day, I couldn't figure out why we kept getting all this free stuff and being treated like this, because I would see other people being treated rudely. And so I finally asked someone, and they said, he's Samoan, right? He came back from the mainland to come home to visit. Yeah. If it's going to get me a free suite, yeah, he's Samoan. But he's not. And we thought it was really funny when we found out that everyone thought he was Samoan because he's really broad-chested and or barrel-chested, broad-shouldered. So we thought it was pretty funny. But that was the one time that it kind of worked in our favor. So from the 50s and 70s, thousands again were being adopted out and raised with little awareness and knowledge of their culture. They really pushed a lot of natives to move to California. And we have a huge population of Native Americans right in Los Angeles, and people don't realize that. And that was part of one of the many acts that the US government did with tribes and got them separated and kind of scattered. Age is another cultural identity consideration. Elders can be very traditional, while younger people can either be multicultural or non-traditional. Many community leaders and elders are worried about the loss of language and tradition, whereas other communities, the young are learning their culture and language. So supporting the needs or the culture needs of children in care. These are sort of some of the things that you could look at to be able to do that. It is extremely important to keep kids culturally connected. During my practicum, that was my focus. I interviewed 20 kids that are preteens or teenagers that were either in tribal or DHS custody. I gave them a cultural assessment to find out how they were being connected to their culture. I went on to interview workers, DHS workers, to find out how they were assisting and keeping the kids culturally connected. And then I also did a focus group with tribes. And then I kind of found out there's a disconnect. And the disconnect is ICWA departments don't necessarily speak to their cultural departments or have like a list of things ready to go for when a child comes into state custody that they could share with us, say, hey, here's 5 things to keep this kid culturally connected. This is a project that I am now working on with the BIA. We're going to tackle this. We just had our first meeting yesterday, so we'll be reaching out to tribes and cultural departments and trying to develop this here in the state of Oklahoma for each tribe, so that when these children do come into care, that there are some activities that that tribe has deemed culturally appropriate in a way to keep the kid connected. I can come up with a list all day long, but I'm not a member of every tribe. So that's wrong to do. That tribe needs to tell us what we need in order to give to the children. So they're the experts. Studies show cultural identity and ethnic pride result in greater school success, lower alcohol and drug use, higher social functioning in Native children, adolescents, and young adults. Native children, adolescents, and young adults involved in their tribal communities and cultural activities have lower rates of depression, alcohol use, and antisocial behavior. Tribal language, ceremonies, and traditions are linked to reduced risk of delinquent behavior for Native children, adolescents, and young adults. Children fare better when placed with their family, in the community, and connected to culture. Recent studies show that all children are far better when placed with relatives. And this is especially true for American and Native children. ICWA promotes connection to culture, elders, community, thus promoting resiliency and well-being. All that above is according to NICWA, the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And that can be found on their website. You know what? A lot of people will say, well, I'll just Google that. Well, you know, Google's not always accurate. There are several tribes here in the state that are traditional. They are not going to have their ceremonies up on YouTube. They're not going to have private ceremonies posted all over the web page. So that's where people have to reach out to the ICWA department when a kid's in custody and try to find out, or a cultural department if that kid is not placed with family or in the community. So that's really important to know, because it really makes a huge impact on children. And sometimes we forget that piece of cultural connections. And how does Oklahoma DHS address this culture? Address culture? Well, completing the circle. We have completing the circle, and it is in its 13th year. The last time we were able to have it face-to-face was in 2019. And there was 701 volunteers, children in care, foster families involved in that event. You had Native Foods, opening ceremony, regalia mothers. From completing the circle, a group was started here in Oklahoma by a friend of mine, Sonia Frazier, who started Regalia Mothers. And this group started making regalia for children to try on. So many of our children never tried regalia or don't have regalia. And this group has started for that. And they've been sewing now for 2 years and have a lot of regalia ready to go for next year's event. 2022 is going to be our year, hoping. And so there's it's a way for children just to come that day. A lot of tribes participate. When I started with this Completing the Circle 7 years ago, sorry, we had 225 volunteers, children, and foster families that participated. And every year, my challenge to myself is to get that number higher and higher. So out of the 20 children that I had interviewed during my practicum, 11 of those children said the last cultural thing that they did was completing the circle. And they talked about how great it was. Of course, because of COVID, we weren't really planning in 2020, but this year what we did, because of COVID, we couldn't have it in person. So we got culture bags together. Tribes donated, came up with activities, and we were able to purchase those items, and we had sign up and dropped them off. So there was stories in there, historical information. It was a good thing. A lot of the kids were excited and the foster families loved it. So it was one way to try to keep them connected. So if anyone ever wants to volunteer or donate, please let me know. But Oklahoma does sponsor this. DHS does, and we work very closely with tribes. Whichever tribe volunteers to host at their site, at their tribal, at their tribe, I make them the co-chair, and so we do it together, make decisions together. But it's a really good event, and children really seem to enjoy it. That's a picture from that event. These are adults, and there's 2 of them in there that are actually DHS employees. That was one of but I would love to show a lot more pictures of that event, but due to children being in the pictures, I cannot. So again, here's a few etiquettes, do's and don'ts. This is taken straight off this culture card. I'll just go over a couple of things, but please refer to this. Avoid stereotyping based on looks, language, dress, appearance. Avoid intrusive questions early on in a conversation when you're working with natives. Don't interrupt. Allow for that silence or that pause. A lot of times my in-laws who have passed away, they were wonderful, wonderful people. They, in talking with them, when they wouldn't want me to know anything, they would talk in Cherokee. But I figured out a few words, and I definitely knew my name in Cherokee, what my Cherokee name is. So I was always able to figure out when they were talking about me. But it was never anything bad. It was usually about my cooking. So, but don't stand too close. Don't talk too loud. Be careful not to impose your personal values or morals. I know, like with my ex-husband, he's 55. He doesn't make a lot of eye contact. When we would go to a restaurant or anywhere, he would order without making eye contact. My son doesn't make a lot of eye contact with people. He does the same thing. So a lot of it goes with that tribe and their culture and their own individual life experiences. So, and be careful about pointing with your finger, which may be interpreted as rude. With many tribes, avoid frequently looking at your watch and don't rush things, don't take pictures. So, these are some very general things to keep in mind. Again, please look at the culture card because it all came from that. And guess what? ICWA is the gold standard. It is the gold standard. There's been over 18 national child advocacy organizations. It lessens trauma of the removal, promoting placement with family and community, mandates that families receive intensive services such as active efforts, and we will go into that in a little bit, to prevent child abuse and neglect and keep children safe in their homes, promotes the best interest of Indian children by keeping them connected to their culture, extended family and community, which are proven protective factors, brings to bear critical information and resources when emergencies arise, promotes placement stability by ensuring the volunteer adoptions are truly voluntary. It works in distinctive adoption deals that fall outside accepted standards of practice, encourage the states to develop effective relationships and procedures with tribes to carefully coordinate the care of Indian children and families. And when I am working, which I'm off the clock today because I'm doing this training, but when I do work, the biggest thing that I started with when I started first working with tribes is I noticed we were constantly asking them to do this or donate this or do whatever it was. And so I started asking, how can I support you? What do you need from me? And tribes would say, you know what, we're doing a foster care training this weekend. We really need someone to come sit with the children and watch them while the parents, foster parents are being trained. I can do that. Hey, we need some donations because we want to give gifts out to the foster families. I can do that. It all came from relationship building. I work very hard with the relationships that I have with tribes. I'm a very blunt person. It works very well with tribes. You always know where you stand with me. I always tell the truth, very open. And so, but it took time to build those relationships. Not only did I have to talk the talk, but I had to walk the walk. I had to do what I said I was going to do. It took a long time to get over the fact that I worked for the state, you know, and to develop that trust. And so, I still work hard at keeping it with the tribes that I'm assigned to. And I work with 18 of the 38 tribes here in the state. Questions, time. That is a picture of me. It's one of my favorite quotes by Wilma Mankiller, who I did meet when I was 18 years old at one of her women's symposiums that she had back in 1989. I worked at Shalagi, which is it was an amphitheater in Tahlequah. I was one of the Indian backdrop people. And that fall, I got a call and was asked to come work in a village that they have in Tahlequah, to stand there during the Indian symposium. And then someone ran out and said, can anyone sing in Cherokee? Well, I was the only one to raise my hand. I can sing in Cherokee. My mom's a piano player. I was raised in the Indian church. And so I was singing, the rest were humming beside me. And afterwards, the same woman came up and asked me, she said, Chief Mankiller wants to speak with you. And so I met her at that time. And it was truly one of the greater honors of my life. I can tell you that. So do we have any questions right now? No questions about historical trauma?
I have, well, maybe not about historical trauma.
Okay.
Are we gonna talk about a couple of maybe years at this point ago about the challenge to ICWA, and there was some kind of court case and things kind of blew up, and I haven't really heard much about what's happened from that.
Well, there was one in Texas. That one, yeah. The last I heard, it didn't stand up in court. The last I heard, I'll be honest with you, if it doesn't, I do watch or monitor, but I really focus on Oklahoma. There's so much going on in Oklahoma right now. It takes a lot of my time and energy just to keep read up on it because of McGirt, which I'm fixing to go over.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay.
We do have a, sorry, in the chat real quick. Is there any legal notice for the tribe claiming a child?
That's a good question. Depends on what status that child is in, such as were they adopted 10 years ago and they find out they're native? Is that what you're asking? I can tell you a lot of times within DHS, sometimes we will not find out, even though the worker will ask the family if they're Native American multiple times. Sometimes they won't say until the till adjudication or until we go to terminate their rights. After we went through everything for 2 years, then the family goes, oh, by the way, I'm Indian. So it just kind of depends. You'd have to really get in there. Okay.
I do have
Anything
a
else?
question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I actually work for a hospice, but I never know when we try to help the whole family. And when this came up, it was just great that it was coming up, because I live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, so we have numerous tribes around us. Mm-hmm. So one question I have is it pronounced ICWA?
ICWA.
ICWA. Does it have any standing in, say, a Native American parent that lives here, and then their significant other lives in another state and has their child that has a membership to a tribe?
Yeah, that would be a civil matter. So no, ICWA would not apply in a civil matter.
Okay, that's what I thought. But it was worth finding out. This has been wonderful. I've appreciated it.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay, let's move on, because I realize I've talked for a whole hour. Usually I only spend 30 minutes on historical trauma. Wow. Okay, let's share our next screen here. Oh, come on, I can't see that. Oh, quit. Oh, no. Sorry, guys, this has come up and I can't. Oh, here we go, slideshow. There we go. Can you see that, everyone?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. All right, so in the state of Oklahoma, we have Oklahoma tribal state agreements, and we have two types of them now. So basically, the first one is a very general, it's for foster care and adoptions, standards for payment. So what that means is, let's say when a tribe opens up a foster home, they send us all the paperwork, we put it in our system, and we make sure that foster parent gets paid. So we handle, because it's a type of funding that's federal funding called 4E. And so we're able to do that. So the tribe has to agree to follow federal guidelines. We agree to pay them promptly. So it's an agreement between ICWA, the ICWA Department of a Tribe, and OKDHS Child Welfare. So that is a legal document. And now we have a second one that we had to come up with. So McGirt happened in 2020, and I will be talking about that in detail later. So when McGirt happened, we had to go into agreement with those 5 tribes that McGirt affected. The McGirt Supreme Court decision basically affected those 5 different tribes: Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Muskogee, and Seminole Nation. So with them, we did another agreement, which basically said that things stay the same, that OKDHS will continue to investigate on your reservation when it is non-tribal land. Yes, it's a reservation, but when I say non-tribal land, that would be before McGirt. So if it is tribal land, of course, that's the tribe that investigates. But if it's not, then DHS continues and to investigate and take those children in custody and to care for them. And so each tribe has a Oklahoma state agreement, and they can change or update that at any time. So again, we went over the definitions of what an Indian child is. Tribes do have the right to information when we take a child into custody, that we notify them. They're allowed to know of all the court hearings, court reports, psych evals, things of that nature. A tribe has a right to that information. And when and how are tribes notified of investigations? Basically, we have a hotline. And when it's called in, that is a question that they ask. Are they Native American? If the caller says, I don't know, the hotline does do a search in our history to see if we can find if they are or are not. And so if they are, the worker is to stop what they're doing, call the tribe, offer for them to go out and do a joint investigation of that referral or not. And then they're to give them a copy of that referral and what it says. We are not allowed to let them know who the reporter is. They do not get that, but we do give them a copy of the referral, and then we're to keep them updated throughout the life of the case. We also have to send every time. Let's say we have this one family and we get a referral every other week. We have to send this membership verification letter to them every time. Why is that important? There are some tribes in the state of Oklahoma that have a blood quantum. And what that means is that you have to have a certain percentage of blood to be a member of that tribe. Guess what? You get a new chief, you get a new council, you get a new, whatever they call their leaders within a tribe, they have different names. They can change that rule. Is a tribe going to call me up and let me know? No. So we need to send this verification every time. The tribe determines if that child is eligible for membership or not. And only a tribe can do that. Things to be aware of in an investigation. If it's a tribal foster home, like I talked about later, and it's on state land, we do a dual investigation. That means we go out with the tribe and investigate. Only a tribe can close down one of their tribal foster homes, and it has to be in writing. So that's something people don't realize. Let's say the worst case has happened in a tribal foster home. We still can't close it down. We don't have to use that home or place our children in there, but we can't close it until they give it to us in writing to close it, because that's in their tribal state agreement. And we usually would do this, but we really don't have time, and I thought we would. This is sort of like one of the things, these are all scenarios that have happened. Where does ICWA apply? Trying to determine if ICWA applies is up to the tribe. We're to write it down, send it to the tribe, and then they're the ones that tell us, you know, if they're a member or eligible for membership. People don't realize you cannot do a 23andMe, no ancestry.com blood test. It is done by lineage. So you have to prove, show that member that was enrolled with a tribe and show how you're kin to them, how it's passed down in order to be eligible for membership to a tribe. Placement preferences. This is something with ICWA. One of the things, if we take a child, let me back up. So let's say someone calls in a referral to be investigated, and the state determines, nah, we're not going to investigate it. It doesn't meet our standards of child abuse or neglect. What we do, my unit does, is we send what we call that screened out referral. We send it to the tribe. The tribes want those referrals. Do you know why? Because they have prevention services. So if they see 5 or 6 referrals in a short time period, they're going to go out and look at that and offer prevention services. They want to stop those kids from coming into custody, and they want to help that family. So that's really an important thing that we do for tribes, and that they are able to get that information. When we do take a child into custody, if we were not able to prevent that removal through active efforts, then we need to follow that tribe's placement preferences. The one that you see on the screen is very generic. That is from just an example, but it's generic. Each tribe has the right to choose their own placement preferences and to deviate from those placement preferences at any time. Oh, a placement agreement for out of home. So right here, you'll see this is a placement agreement for out of home care. And a lot of times foster families will say, I didn't know the child was Indian, or the child was there for 2 years and the child is being moved now because an appropriate, culturally appropriate ICWA home was found. And I understand they get upset. And they are bonded, and I get that. However, every kid that's ever placed in any foster home within DHS, there's a big section there that they recognize this child is Indian, and that child can be moved. I also created a navigation tool map for foster parents that are non-native, for them to understand questions, where to go, things of that nature. It's a great tool. So it's really important that they understand that this child is native and can be moved once an ICWA compliant home is located. Judicial options for tribes. So a tribe can get involved with the case as much as they want and as little as they want. And some tribes are more involved than others. And it's up to that tribe to determine that. So they have exclusive jurisdiction. This means a tribe can take the case on fully. They can request from state court for that case to be moved to tribal court. The tribal court says, yes, we accept this transfer. And at that time, that child is no longer in state custody, but in tribal custody. Okay, have ongoing consultation, collaboration with the state. If any ICWA case and the tribe has a right to have an ongoing consultation, collaboration with state and OKDHS workers, which a state worker should provide regular updates, information, and be working with that tribe. And again, a tribe can choose not to intervene. That is their right, and we cannot force them. So that's sometimes a hard thing for workers or outside people to understand. Regardless of how the tribe initially decides to proceed, they are able to increase or decrease their involvement with the state case at any time. Tribal enrollment and updating documentation. First of all, that's the parent. The parent, we can transport that parent to go enroll a child. The ICWA worker can enroll a child, but it's really important for that parent to do that and make that decision, because they can be members of multiple tribes, and the parent, you know, has that right to be able to say, well, I want him to be enrolled in my tribe, not my husband's, or because he's out of the picture, whatever. The parent makes that determination. DHS workers cannot do it without a court order to enroll that child in a tribe. That's really important for people to know. Placing in a tribal foster home. We do have tribal foster homes that are open here in Oklahoma, and we use them with the tribe's permission. Again, we have to ask that tribe to use their home, and we can place in their home. What people don't realize, tribes cannot use a DHS home. They can use our like therapeutic foster homes. They can use our group homes when a child cannot be placed in a regular foster home, but they are not allowed to place in our DHS foster homes, period. Now, this is a really nice tool, and I can send this out if anyone needs it. This is not the picture of the updated one, but if it's on tribal land, it's we do follow the MOU. And what that is a memorandum of understanding, reporting, investigating child abuse and crime offensive in Indian country. We do follow it. It says we have 36 hours to notify a tribe. So basically, when a referral is called in, it goes to that county where the referral comes from. That county is going to be the expert to know or to figure out, is this on tribal land or not? If it is on tribal land, it goes straight to the tribe. There's been a lot of controversy about that over the years, but I don't have time to tell that story, and we're not going to do the tribal land activity. And so here are active efforts. Active efforts are being active in an effort to try to either get that child from not being removed from that parent, or to get that reunification, get that child back with the parent. So it's not just, I gave the mom a number to go get some food at the food bank. Nope, that's not it. I arranged transportation for this mother to ensure that she was able to go to the food bank, called to make sure she got it, that the transportation was there, followed through. So it's a little bit more than a reasonable effort. It's an active effort. That's why it's considered the gold label of ICWA is just phenomenal, because it takes that little extra step. And I think all cases should be, by the way. Here's some examples of reasonable efforts versus active efforts. So we do provide a list to tribes on what active efforts we've been doing. We'll reach out to tribes and ask them if they see something we don't see, and providing an active effort. Make sure that it's culturally appropriate. I know there's a lot of mental health people in here. Your Honor, I mean, we've got a big need, which is culturally appropriate mental health services for families. And so there's a few in Tulsa. Wraparound services with Indian Health Services does an excellent job, but there is not a lot of culturally appropriate services for children. And so that's something to think about. Documentation, we need to document in our DA report. And when we're done with the investigation, we give that tribe a copy of that district attorney's report and let them know what happened. Again, we talked about transferring to a tribal case, and we talked about why you have to do that. We have to have good cause hearings when we are not following the placement preferences. And the person that has to request a good cause hearing is the person that is not following the placement preferences. So that's usually the state. Request a good cause hearing, agreement by the tribe. Placement helps the court make the good cause finding, but it is not required. Good cause finding required at every hearings when placement is being changed. Communication, DHS, it does say in our policy that we are to communicate monthly with that tribe, giving them updates. That tribe has a right to be invited to any and all meetings that we have, or to know the outcome of that meeting if they were not able to participate. Termination of parental rights. You do have to have a tribe to sign off with that and provide expert witness testimony. An expert witness is recognized by that tribe, and it cannot be a DHS worker. So the tribe usually will have a list of people that they recognize as expert witnesses, and they will provide that. However, if the tribe is not in agreement with DHS, they will not provide that to us. It then falls on the DA, district attorney's office, to try to locate a qualified expert witness. Adjudication, we won't go over that. ICWA, DHS foster care and adoptions. Again, tribes, if a tribe has a home opened and that home wants to be with DHS and the tribe, we have to have permission from the tribe to do that. You want to get a copy of the home study of the tribe, ask permission to get it out. Well, that's just for that. You still need to get tribal verification of the foster parents. DHS has a form for that. Tribes can't share background information, references, things of that nature. And then the tribe does approve and gives names for all expert witness testimony. Again, adoptions, tribes must be invited to all criteria staffings. Good cause must be granted for an adoption. And family members or anyone out there for the child to be adopted by or to be placed with. Let's see, foster care and adoptions review, tribe must, we already did that one, sorry. Supporting the culture needs, we already talked about this and went over it, but again, it's very important. Our policy does say it's DHS's job to provide cultural connections to children. And the biggest part of my job is communication. Working with tribes. Every time I do a training, I can't tell you how many people say, how do I talk to a tribe? And I'm like, have you picked up the phone and called them? And I don't mean to be a smart aleck, but every tribal person I know speaks English. And so there is no special way other than just being genuine. Be a real person. Tell them you don't know, that you want to learn more about their culture, or you want to have open communication. What's the best way for us to communicate? Email, text, what? So that's the biggest part of my job. I'd say 99% is all about communication. And that's really what I want. I want all child welfare specialists to have the relationship that I have with tribes. I want them to be able to be open and walk and talk to them, and just to be able to ask questions and have that comfortability. It's better for our children. We talked about tribal sovereignty. The McGirt decision. Okay, so for over 2 centuries, sovereign Native nations have asserted their rights in negotiation of their relationships with the United States through the variety of means, most potentially treaties and federal court arguments. On July 9, 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court decided McGirt versus Oklahoma, a 5-4 decision that a major part of the land of Oklahoma is still located within the Muskogee, and it's changed now, it's not Muskogee Creek, they changed their name to Muskogee Nation Reservation. This decision also recognized Cherokee Nation Reservation, Seminole Nation Reservation, Chickasaw Nation Reservation, Choctaw Nation Reservation in Oklahoma. So the very day that that decision was made, Muskogee Nation was responsible for almost 900 Indian children on their reservation. That's why they have the McGirt tribal state agreement with us. They did not have the manpower to take that on. They are working towards that. Most of the 5 tribes that I know of are to have that responsibility and to be able to have over the Indian children on the reservation. So that is something that's really important, and things will be changing in our future. I wish I had more time to go into this. I do want to note that one other tribe has filed in court this week, and it was granted. This is not one of the 5 tribes. This tribe is Sac and Fox Nation. They cited McGirt, saying that they have jurisdiction of any Indian children on their reservation, and they were granted that. And they are taking 2 children in custody that they're not members or eligible for membership of their tribe. So that is a precedent. I feel like all the tribes in the state are going to be doing that eventually. And so, but that's the first tribe so far out of the 5 that has done that. This is that interactive map. Again, if you click on the blue highlights in the corners of each of these 5, it'll take you directly to their tribal map. It'll show you what's on a reservation or not. And then working together with our tribal partners is best for our children and families. We have a DHS tribal unit. We've been around for 6 years now, or 7 years. I've been in it for 6. I actively participate in tribal recruitment of foster homes, do completing the circle. So I just want to thank you for everyone that attended this training today. If there's anything I can ever do to assist you, any of the tools that I have developed that you would like, please let me know. For the attorneys in the group, I want to stop sharing now. For the attorneys in the group, this was emailed to you if you can see it. This was written by Oklahoma, or this was written by Angel Smith. She, I consider her an ICWA expert, and she wrote this. The BIA produces it, and you were sent a digital copy. And so please read over it. It's for DAs, judges, all about ICWA. And she literally, Angel updated it this summer. It's a wonderful tool. It's good for workers, anyone that if you're dealing with ICWA in the courts, it's a great, great tool. And I'm very thankful that they were able to do that. Does anyone, and hey, I want to let you know, I have dyslexia. So if you see misspelled stuff or grammar issues, yeah, it's called double dyslexia. So if you want my PowerPoint, that's great. If you want to change some grammar issues, be my guest. I did not put it through Grammarly. I did do spell check, but it doesn't always pick up my grammar stuff. So I know I'm almost out of time. We have about 4 minutes. Is there any dying questions that you have?
There are 2 questions in the chat, Kelly. The first one is, at any time can a tribe request a child be moved even if they're in an ICWA compliant home?
They can, yes, they can request that child to be moved. If DHS is not in agreement, that's where I come into place, and I kind of handle that. I'm a mediator that way. Most of the time, as long as you're working with the tribe in the very beginning, they're going to be in agreement. You know, even when they don't agree, you can work it out. So it's just creating that relationship from the get-go and carrying it on.
Okay, the second question is, is the Sac and Fox tribe now responsible for children not eligible for enrollment as long as they're on reservation land?
If they're Native American, that's what they're going for. It's only specific for this one case right now. So I don't know what that's going to look like for them. I just know that the state court accepted it yesterday. So I don't know. Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. Be looking for the news, because I think eventually it's going to come out in the news. There's a lot about McGirt. Again, I wish we could talk more about it, because there's actually businesses and not wanting to pay taxes because they're on a reservation. The first business to file in federal courts right here in my backyard. It's a power company. So my county is missing out on millions of dollars So there's there's a lot to it. And just sorry I ran out of time.